Hello, class. This is Wednesday, October 21st. This is English 221, and I'm Professor Barbara Wyman. And we don't get to read Oedipus Rex, Oedipus the King, this semester since we have an unusual semester, to say the least. But I want to give you the backstory because I've posted the summary of Oedipus the King in Moodle, and it's important to understand Antigone, who is Oedipus's sister / daughter. So you have to kind of understand the story of Oedipus to really understand Antigone. And so I'm going to give you a really quick backstory of Oedipus. You don't really particularly need to know all of this except for how it pertains to Aristotle's tragic heroes and to Antigone. So the backstory. King Laius and Queen Jocasta are the king and queen of Thebes. Thebes was a city-state. City-states are separate kingdoms in the area of what we now call Greece, of antiquity. The city-states, we've talked about a few of them, Mycenae and whatnot, Sparta, Athens. This is the city-state of Thebes, and King Laius and Queen Jocasta are the king and queen. King Laius is jerky, bad, and he is visiting a neighboring city-state, and he rapes the son, which is shocking. He rapes the son, whose name is Chrysippus. It's called the rape of Chrysippus. And the father of that neighboring city-state son curses King Laius and says, "Your son will kill you. You will have a son who kills you." So King Laius does a bad thing, the rape of Chrysippus. Chrysippus's father curses him, "Your son will kill you." And he goes back to home to Queen Jocasta, and I don't know what's in his mind, but she gets pregnant, and they have a baby, and King Laius says, "Uh-oh, I've been cursed," so she has to tell Queen Jocasta. So they say, well, we've got to get rid of that baby. And so they're going to expose the baby out in the field. I know this is a crazy story. So they nail a baby to a board and send the baby with a shepherd to be left in the fields. They didn't directly kill the baby. They were just going to let the baby die in the fields. But the shepherd is good, and he's sad for the nailed to the board baby. And so another shepherd is passing by, and the shepherd from Thebes gives the baby on the board to this other shepherd, who is a shepherd of Corinth, because that shepherd says, "The king and queen of Corinth, my master and mistress, have been praying for a baby." So that nailed to the board baby is brought to Corinth, and the king and queen raise the baby as their own child, and they name the baby Oedipus, because Oedipus means swollen feet, because he'd been nailed to the board. And Prince Oedipus knows nothing about all this nonsense. He just grows up. His ankles hurt, we'll find out later, from being nailed to the board. But he grows up as the good Prince Oedipus of Corinth, knowing nothing about his background. His mom and dad should have known better, but there you go. So there's a big feast, and a drunk guest tells Oedipus, "You think you're the prince, but you're really they found you out in the fields. You're really just a foundling." And this upsets Prince Oedipus. He asks his parents, and his parents tell him, "Don't listen to drunk guests." They don't deny the story. And so Oedipus is upset by that, so he decides to do what all good people in antiquity did. He went to the oracle of Delphi, and the oracle tells him, when he asks him about what the drunk guest said, the oracle tells him something horrifying. The oracle says, "You will kill your father and marry your mother." So poor Prince Oedipus, he went to find out if he was a foundling, And what he gets instead is the worst prophecy that you can imagine, that he's going to kill his father and marry his mother. So he thinks his father and mother are King Polybus and Queen Merope. So being good, he says, well, I am going to skedaddle away from Corinth. So he leaves, and he's wandering, and he runs in to none other than King Laius and his men on a really narrow road. And King Laius tries to knock him off the road. Oedipus, of course, has no idea that that's his father, nor does King Laius know that that's his son. But Oedipus, fearing for his life, fights, and he kills King Laius and his men, not knowing what he had just fulfilled the oracle. And one of the men escapes, and we find out later in the play that one of the men who escaped recognized Oedipus somehow because it was that shepherd. So this is a really fun story. So then Oedipus is going to keep going, and he's going to go to Thebes eventually, except King Laius is gone, and they're waiting for him to come back. Queen Jocasta is waiting for him, and we find out that there's a sphinx terrorizing Thebes because of all the bad things that have happened of exposing the child. And so that's what King Laius was doing. He was on his way to Delphi too to find out about the Sphinx. However, Oedipus arrives and he solves the riddle of the Sphinx. The Sphinx was camped out on the walls of Thebes and killing everybody trying to come in unless they could solve her riddle, called the riddle of the Sphinx. And the riddle is, what has 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs at night, which seems like a pretty easy rhyme, but everybody was not getting it, and they were dying, and there was bodies stacking up on the outside of Thebes. But so Oedipus, Laius is dead, and Oedipus goes and he solves, I'm going to call him Eddie. Eddie solves the riddle of the Sphinx because the answer to that riddle, the riddle of the Sphinx, is that it's a human. 4 legs crawling as a baby, 2 legs at the mid-time of life, and 3 legs because you have a cane when you're old. So the Sphinx is vanquished, and Oedipus goes into Thebes, and they wait for the king to come home to reward him, except the king's not going to come home because he's dead. And as is tradition in the older city-states, Oedipus marries the queen because he's a hero, and he marries the queen. And so before too long, he killed his father and married his mother, even while he was doing what everybody thought was the right thing to do. He was totally clueless and in the dark, no fault of his own. And so the tragedy Oedipus opens because there's another plague in Thebes, and now he's King Oedipus. Oedipus Rex. He's King Oedipus, and there's another plague, and everybody's dying. The kids are dying, and the sheep and the flocks are dying, and the babies are being stillborn. And so King Oedipus, when Oedipus the King opens, is trying to get to the bottom of this new disaster in Thebes, and that's how it opens. And you can read the summary. He's going to find out, King Oedipus, because he sends his brother-in-law Creon to the oracle. And the oracle tells him it's because the killer of the old king is still living in Thebes. And so when King Oedipus finds that out, he says, I'm going to find the killer of the king and banish him. Except he's the killer of the king. So he just promised to find himself. But he's totally in the dark. And that's the story of Oedipus the King. He does find out slowly. And Queen Jocasta doesn't know either. She's married her son. They have 4 children. Ismene, Antigone, Polybus, and Eteocles. So those children are King Oedipus's children and his half-sibling. So it's really crazy. And that's the story of Oedipus the King. When he finds out, he's so horrified, he blinds himself, he pokes his eyes out, and Queen Jocasta hangs herself. So you can read the whole thing, the summary. And the tragedy Antigone happens after Oedipus is exiled. He's blind, he goes off, Queen Jocasta's dead, and Creon, King Creon, Creon, Jocasta's brother, becomes the new king because Jocasta's dead, Oedipus has exiled himself, and Creon is left to be the king of Thebes and to finish raising those poor children of King Oedipus and Queen Jocasta. This tragedy was based on an ancient myth. Sophocles turned it into the famous tragedy of Oedipus the King. Sophocles is one of the tragedians, and it's his characterization of Oedipus that makes this such a good, famous tragedy. So there's an ancient myth that was turned into a tragedy, and this is where Freud got the Oedipus complex of a son and the mother. That's in that tragedy. All right.